All right. Hello, AP World History students. Today is February 12th. It is a Tuesday in 2019. So, a couple things that we're going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and just do a recap of what it was that we covered yesterday. Our overall goal is to explain the cause and effects of the revolutions during the early modern era. What you need to be able to do in regards to key concepts for the chapter 16 in your Strayer book is to be able to identify the causes of each and every one of the revolutions. So we have the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, as well as the South American revolutions. You need to be able to identify the causes and effects, but also similarities and differences between them. What this lesson is going to go ahead and do is just look at the French Revolution. I go in depth with the French Revolution for a couple reasons. Number one, I find it very interesting, and also number two is that in many ways it goes ahead and it sparks the revolutions in Haiti as well as the South American revolutions. So what we did yesterday was we took your reading quiz on Strayer chapter 16, and you do have your reading notes which are due today. All right. Well, you have two images here. You have Maximilian Robespierre, and then you also have the guillotine. And these are two important components looking at the effects of the French Revolution. So let's get started. So the first thing I want you guys to do, I actually have right here, pasted in the link, and I'll email you guys all the PowerPoint as well. Or one of the things that you could do is if you just go ahead and just search History Channel documentary French Revolution. Search that on YouTube. I repeat, History Channel documentary French Revolution. It is an hour and 30 minutes long. What I want you to do is go ahead and just watch the first 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And based on the first 3 minutes, what can you conclude about the French Revolution? All right, so go ahead, take some time to do so. All right. So you should have paused the video. If you didn't, make sure that you did. But let's go through this. So some of the most common answers that I got in class as you're watching that video is you should understand was that the French Revolution was so important specifically because it was influenced, or it went ahead and influenced other revolutions in Haiti as well as in South America. The French Revolution was also so important because one could argue that it was directly related to the American Revolution, right? That the French Revolution in many ways was caused by the French government's debt in which that they helped fund the American Revolution, but also fought against Great Britain in the 7 Years' War. But more importantly, one thing you want to understand about the French Revolution was it fought for Enlightenment ideals and ideas that would be spread all around the world. These include just freedom of press. You're looking at the social contract, right? You're also looking at freedom of religion. And more importantly, that there's the idea of the Enlightenment principle is that you should, in some ways, question authority, and you should, in some ways, also look at evidence as a source of reasoning. All right. I want you to go ahead and continue to watch that documentary, and you're going to go from 3 minutes to about 10:30. Okay. And these are the questions I'd like you to answer. What was life like for the monarchy? Describe the monarchs, and why was France so broke? Looking at this, a couple of things that you want to understand was that life for the monarchy was very good in France. Sorry. You're looking at that as they were very isolated. In fact, King Louis, I believe the 14th, went ahead and actually moved the monarchs to Versailles, the palace in Versailles, which was very much away from the rest of the social classes in France. If you lived in France during this time, one of the things that you'd be doing is you'd be spending a lot of money. Right, you would hire the nobility, which would live in the French palace, and they would have these ceremonies, such as putting the king to sleep, waking up the king, watching the king eat breakfast. So in many ways, if you were the monarch, you would live very much as if you were godlike. In fact, one of the terms that you'll read later on is the kings often felt like that they had divine rule. What divine rule meant was that specifically that God gave them the right to rule. So the monarchs that you read about or you observe in this video, the first one is you have the fat little boy who's not ready to rule. And this is King Louis XVI. You also have Marie Antoinette, who was a young teenager from Austria. And the reason why these two specifically get married is because it is a political alliance between Austria and France. Right, that is the reason why they end up getting married. Both monarchs, both states believe that if they were to go ahead and have these two marriages, it would bring or get married, it would bring a period of peace and prosperity for both of them. A couple of things that you understand was during this time, France is also broke, right? France was broke specifically because of the 7 Years' War, or as you may also know it, is the French and Indian War. This war was a result of the colonization of the Americas. Remember, during this time, Great Britain had went ahead and colonized the colonies in North America. France was also establishing its colonization in North America as well. So both of these two colonies, the French and the British colonies, were basically fighting for that territory, which would lead France to lose and in many ways also become broke because of the money that was vested in that. Other things about the monarchy that you also understand is that it is very important for monarchs to, during this time, to have an heir, right, to continue the bloodline. And Marie Antoinette, as well as King Louis, are very much criticized specifically because they wait for a period of time to go ahead and have children. More importantly, both of them are interested in politics. They're young. King Louis is often described as a leader that doesn't know how to make decisions, right? He's not aggressive. And he's even quoted saying that when his grandfather dies, is that he's afraid to rule, right? He's praying to God that everything will turn out okay, which isn't a bad thing, but it kind of just shows his lack of confidence in how to run a country. From 1029 to 1930, you want to go ahead and watch this because it does give you a nice visual. There's a couple of people you want to identify. Maximilian Robespierre, right? And also you understand why was Enlightenment so important for this revolution, and in what way did the American Revolution impact the French. So it's a very ironic is if you read Strayer chapter 16 is that you understand that as a result of the French Revolution, the Committee of Public Safety, which was led by Maximilian Robespierre, would run the government, would run the constitutional monarchy after the French Revolution, once King Louis and Marie Antoinette are killed. What's ironic about 1029 in the video is that Maximilian Robespierre, he's a young college student, he's actually greeting King Louis as he leaves his carriage, and King Louis doesn't care. He's like, "Who are you? I'm above you. This is not important to me." What's ironic about it is that many years later, Maximilian Robespierre would be the one that sentenced King Louis to death with beheading through the guillotine. During this time of the video, one of the things you also focus on is why was Enlightenment so important for the revolution? What you understand is the Enlightenment is a cause of the revolution simply because of the philosophies and ideas that were being spread about rebelling and questioning the government. Before then, you never questioned government. The government was very much like religion. If you question the government, you're questioning God. Well, what the Enlightenment was doing, it was providing scientific reasoning, evidence, and debate on specifically why it is that people should have a better way of living, why people should have more power. And the revolution is responsible for that, or the Enlightenment is responsible for that. In what way did the American Revolution impact the French? A few ways. Number one, remember, in the 7 Years' War, the French were going against the British. What the French decided to do was go ahead and help fund the American Revolution by sending some troops over. Obviously, the Americans were successful in defeating Great Britain, and that's because of a lot of the troops that were sent by French. Well, this causes the French government to be even more broke, right? So that is one. The second impact the American Revolution has is the American Revolution was also influenced by Enlightenment ideals. And if the Americans were successful, what many French citizens start to believe is, why can't we be successful in overthrowing the king as well? Okay. So those are the big three that you want to understand: is Enlightenment, the American Revolution, and the Enlightenment was so important specifically was because it helped spark the American and the French Revolution. As you continue through the video, it goes through the economic, environmental, political, and social causes that led to the revolution. First thing, let's look at the political. During this time, France is starving, right? Many of the peasants can no longer even just afford bread, and the government can't fund anything specifically because they are so broke from funding the American Revolution. And it doesn't make it any better that you have Marie Antoinette, who goes ahead and she's living her luxurious lifestyle. She's spending a lot of money and getting the government in more debt on her lavish hairstyles, right? On her stylish dresses. In fact, she's even just coined the term Madame Deficit, meaning that she's spending way too much money. And I want you to consider this: is an environmental cause would be the famine. Right? There was a famine in the late 1700s, which led to a very poor harvest in wheat. And as a result of that, people can no longer produce bread, meaning they can't have access to food. So the government's not necessarily helping because all they're doing is, Marie Antoinette's kind of just the face of this, of spending the money irresponsibly. Environmentally, people can't grow crops, so they're starving. So as a result of this, this revolution would go ahead and start. The next cause would be social cause. With the social cause, I'm about to go through the state system, and one of the things that you will see is that there is a lot of social inequality between the three classes. You have the nobility, you've got the clergy, then you've got 99% of the population, which is the peasants, right? And they have no social rights whatsoever. And we'll go through this. And that can also be tied into political. So this is the social class in France. A couple things I want you to notice is you need to be responsible for knowing the three estates. On the very top, you have the first estate, which is the clergy, right? What we mean by clergy is we're talking specifically about church officials. We're looking at bishops, cardinals, priests. One of the things that you want to understand, and I'll make sure that you write down, is that the clergy consisted of 1% of the population. But this 1%, they owned more than 10% of the land in France, right? This land was dedicated to the creation of religious schools, churches, cathedrals, etc. What they also did was they collected tithes. Tithes was very similar to a tax. So they'd collect this money that would go directly to the church, and guess who's paying for that? The third estate, right? 95% of the population. One thing you also want to understand here is they are paying no taxes. The first estate pays no taxes whatsoever. Next is you're getting nobility. This is the aristocracy. This is people who own land, right? They are the second estate. You're getting them to represent roughly about 4% of the population. The second estate, the nobility, they had some of the top jobs in the government. They also had some of the top jobs in the army, the courts, and also had some role in the church that weren't specifically related to being a bishop or a priest. Okay? What you understand about them is they paid no taxes whatsoever as well. So I want you to think about this. If none of these two are paying taxes, where is all of the money coming from? Ta-da, here it is. This is literally everyone else. This is the third estate. One thing you understand about the third estate is this population is very diverse. You might have farmers and peasants that would be part of this third estate. You also might have some lawyers, merchants, and doctors who in some ways were a little bit more wealthy and a little bit more educated. So this was a very diverse population. Now, one thing you want to understand about this third estate is that they are paying all of the taxes. So if the government is broke and people are starving, well, guess whose money that is? That's the third estate. And the first and second estate continue to live with prosperity for the most part, right? They're not sitting in bread lines like 95% of the population is. And the third estate becomes very angry, specifically because they're starving, they can't get any food, but yet they're getting most of their money taken away as a result of taxes. This is a political cartoon that you will commonly see. There's so many variations of this. And what I want you to do is take a minute, pause the video, and go over what the message of this cartoon is. All right. Well, let's go through this. I mean, the message of this cartoon is basically that looking at the state system, that the peasants are the base of the estate system, right? That the nobility and the clergy and the king, that they're basically living off of the peasants' hard work, right? Or you could even infer that the peasants are breaking their back for the first and second estate, right? If we go back here, remember, this is the base of the pyramid. They're 95% of the population. They are the ones that are working hard. And as a result of that, it's the nobility and the clergy that are in some ways benefiting from this. And you could see that. Right, you could see the nobility and the clergy right up here, the king, King Louis, that they're benefiting specifically off of the backbreaking work that the peasants do. Right. So, in order to deal with the lack of money that the French government has, King Louis calls an Estates General. Okay, I would underline this term, Estates General. This Estates General, what this basically means is a meeting between the three estates. A meeting between three estates. It's typically done just an emergency situation. In this case, King Louis is calling a meeting to vote on a tax for the nobility. Right? He basically sees that, hey, our government is broke. We need to better the standard of living, so the nobility needs to be taxed. And this is on March 5th, 1789. However, there's only one way in which that you could go ahead and get this done, and that is by voting, right? And you're thinking, oh, Miss Berber, this is great. People are getting representation. Well, yes and no. So in the States General, here's the way that things typically happen. So upon meeting, it became obvious that a third estate would not give the king what he wanted without a change in voting procedures to fairly balance the three groups. So let's go over really quick just how this voting system of the States General would work. First off, one of the things that you want to understand is that this is the amount of votes right here prior to or during this Estates General. So the first estate would be given one vote, right? And that first estate would typically have 300 representatives. The second estate, would go ahead and have one vote, and they would also be given 300 representatives. The third estate, they would have 600 representatives amongst them. And the reason for this is because they're 95% of the population. Okay? So what would end up happening is each of these estates would go in their separate room and assemble and discuss how they would vote. And then they would have one representative vote for each of these states. One for the first, one for the second, one for the third. So let's say, for example, if you were voting for tax reform, in this case, King Louis wants to vote for putting a tax on nobility, what's going to end up happening is it's going to be majority rules. So the first and second estate, who aren't taxed, decide, hey, we don't want this tax to happen. Well, the third estate is screwed even if they vote, because their vote only consists of one, even though they are 95% of the population. So what problem do you see here? Well, the biggest problem with this estate vote that they have, where each estate is only getting one, is that 95% of the population is represented as equally as the second and first estate, even though these two estates are only making up 5% of the population, right? So the third estate is furious about this. They feel that they're not represented. Of course, you're going to get the rich and the wealthy, the first and second estate who have most of the power. They're going to gang up against the third estate, where the third estate is always going to feel as if they're oppressed. So one of the things that they approve here, or that the third estates want to do, is they want to change the voting system. Rather than voting off of number of votes per state, they say, let's do total amount of representatives. This makes it a little bit more fair, as you are getting 600 total votes with the first and second estate, 300 plus 300, obviously, simple math, versus the 600 votes that the third estate would get. Okay, so this would make it a bit more fair. Well, that doesn't happen, right? In fact, as the book goes through, is as when the third estate goes to meet, they're locked out of the room where they normally should, and they end up meeting on the tennis court or badminton court, and they make the tennis court oath, as we call it, right? And one of these things, they form what we call the National Assembly. And this National Assembly, one of the documents that you want to really be able to understand is the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And through this Declaration of the Rights of Man, they come up with several things. I recommend that you look through the document I gave you, read through it, because you'll see it on the test, more than likely probably on the AP exam. If you click on the link in the PowerPoint, it's actually someone reading it for you, so you could listen to it as well. A couple things that you want to understand about the Declaration of Rights of Man is that it's basically saying that all people are created equal, and it guarantees freedoms of speech, press, and religion. During this time, Catholicism was the official religion of the French government. One thing you also understand was this was very much influenced by the Declaration of Independence as well. So on the AP exam, you should be able to kind of look at the parallels between that. Well, as a result of this, nothing is getting done. I mean, the king refuses to acknowledge the National Assembly, right? He refuses to acknowledge the Declaration of Rights of Man. He refuses to acknowledge the changes that the French want, or that the third estate wants in the Estates General. So as a result of this, what we end up getting is what we call in France Bastille Day, right? This happens in early July, where they would ignite the start of the French Revolution. The Bastille was a prison in Paris, right? And in many ways, people felt like it symbolized the injustices of the monarchy. The Bastille also had a good amount of weapons. So July 14, 1789, the mob storms the Bastille, and they take over the government as well, right? The church's land were sold. The church officials were also taken control of. And then this is what we'd have with the establishment of what we'd call the constitutional monarchy, right? Which in some ways provided more representation for the third estate. We could go into detail about this, but literally for the AP World Exam, you just need to be able to identify the main root causes of this. However, the revolution does not end here. From 1793 to 1794, we'd get what we call the Reign of Terror. And this is led by Maximilian Robespierre, who was pictured here in his Committee of Public Safety. And the term public safety is a key buzzword that you could use to, in some ways, explain this reign of terror. What they would do is they would kill anyone that would go against the French Revolution, anyone that would go against the constitutional monarchy. If you supported the king, you'd be killed. In fact, King Louis and Marie Antoinette were both given the guillotine, right? So realistically, this period would begin right after the execution of Louis XVI. Traitors and the enemies of the revolution were executed. Numbers vary. An estimated of 40,000 people were killed just in 1 year alone of the Reign of Terror. Okay? So there was a lot of fear that was instilled. People did not want to go against the revolution, but in many ways, I want you to consider this. The Reign of Terror went against the Declaration of Rights of Man. Right? The Declaration of Rights of Man guaranteed freedom of the press, freedom of speech. But if you spoke out against the constitutional monarchy that existed or the French Revolution, you were killed for it. So there really was no freedom that existed. Right? Finally, what I recommend that you do, if you watch this link, watch it from 8:30 till the end. It gives a brief summary of Napoleon Bonaparte and the way that he was able to seize power. I'm not going to go too in depth about this just because you need to look at more of the results of the French Revolution rather than Napoleon's reign. That's another day of lecture, which we'll go through. A couple things about Napoleon Bonaparte was he seized power in 1799 and he ruled France until 1814. He was able to gain power through a coup. I mean, a coup, you want to think about this as force rule, right? He was able to go ahead and just overthrow militarily the government that was in power. So, sum it up, coup is a quick seizure of government. Eventually, I mean, he's a very victorious military leader. Some of the things that he would go ahead and instill was ending of feudalism, the equality of rights, religious toleration. He would bring back the church, but in some ways, he would allow people the freedom. He'd also have uniform and secular law codes, so meaning that religion and state were completely free. However, one of the things that he felt that he needed to do was he needed to go ahead and spread just some of the reforms that he had in France into other territories. And in fact, he was very successful in doing this. I want you to consider, look at this image. How does this portray Napoleon? Stop it. A couple of things. I mean, it portrays him as a very successful military leader. This is actually Napoleon in the Alps, right? It portrays him as very powerful and very charismatic, and in many ways he was. I mean, if you're looking at this map, this is Napoleon's empire in 1810, 4 years before he was taken out of power. Everything in purple, you see the French. What you're also looking at is just anyone that was at war with Napoleon. That would be in the green, but look at the amount of territory that was allied with Napoleon, right? Allied with Napoleon typically means it may or may not have, it was not part of the French Empire, but in many ways it was under French rule. They had to follow French law. Okay? So Napoleon was able to expand his empire to become one of the largest empires since the Roman Empire, which was way back in the classical period. Many states, one thing you understand was they wanted their independence, but they appreciated the reforms Napoleon made as it brought much stability. Going back to this image, I want you to look at how this portrays Napoleon. I think this image is very powerful because it shows that in many ways, the French Revolution, it wanted to instill freedom, but it took away people's freedom. And the main result was you're getting an absolute monarch that's back in power, right? Because of that period of instability. Now, this absolute monarch, and you're looking at the way Napoleon is portrayed, he's almost portrayed as if he's a divine ruler, right? That he was given the rule to the will to rule specifically by God. So what's ironic about the French Revolution is you're getting the fight for more freedom, right? For more freedom in terms of political power. Well, that's granted, but the instability that's led to that time would lead to, in some ways, more limited power through Maximilian Robespierre and then Napoleon. Napoleon would end up even just declaring himself the emperor of France as well. Okay. That pretty much sums up everything that you need to know about Napoleon in regards to AP World History, or Napoleon, but more the French Revolution. What we'll go through tomorrow is the French Revolution's impact in Haiti as well as the South American states.